Thanks very much to the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology and the Cyberspace Solarium Commission for the invitation to participate in this important event. My name is John Miller, Senior Vice President for Policy and General Counsel at ITI, where I lead our Trust, Data, and Technology Policy team, including our work on cybersecurity and supply chain security globally. For those who don't know ITI, the Information Technology Industry Council, we are the premier global advocate for technology, representing nearly 80 of the world's most innovative companies from across the tech sector, including hardware, software, and services, all doing business in the US and globally. I've also had the honor of serving as the co-chair of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency-led ICT Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force for over the past 2 years, and also currently serve as the vice chair of the IT Sector Coordinating Council. So I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the importance of public-private collaboration and driving solutions to our most pressing cybersecurity and supply chain issues, and acknowledge the work of the hundreds of individuals volunteering their time, these important public-private partnership activities, including several of our panelists today. The title of our panel here is Product Integrity, or What Are Tech Suppliers Doing to Secure Their Products? But as our panelists will further explain, our discussion will focus on the security and integrity of products in the broadest sense of the term, to include not only devices, but hardware, software, services, and the integration of these different things, as well as how products and services are delivered via networks and platforms. Building secure products and services is, of course, a priority for ITI and our members, and from my vantage point, for companies large and small across the information technology and communication sectors. However, widening the aperture and seeing the bigger picture is critical. It is imperative that we not lose sight of the importance of taking a thoughtful, holistic approach to securing not only products and services, but the broader networks and complex ecosystems of which they make up only one part. And also that we don't get distracted searching for one-size-fits-all silver bullet solutions to this issue. I'm fairly confident saying at this point that they don't exist based on my experience. Okay, so we only have 40 minutes to discuss this complex topic. Luckily, we have a great group of panelists today in Edna Conway, Catherine Condello, Andras Zakal, and Matt Wickhouse, who in the interest of time will introduce themselves the first time they speak. So let's start with Edna. You bring a unique perspective on these issues, having worked for both a large hardware vendor for many years and now at a company that is not only a leading software provider, but one that is integral to driving the platform economy, including specifically mobility and cloud services. How has your perspective on product integrity and security evolved, and what are some of the issues you're most focused on today?
Great, thanks for the question. I appreciate it, John. So I'm Edna Conway, and I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Security and Risk Officer for Microsoft's intelligent cloud platform, Azure. And I love that you wove in the phrase I introduced a few years ago at RSA, John, the platform economy. And to give context, I think, to the issues in technology I'm working on, as you asked about, let me first share a couple of things. So a couple of premises, and one is that we live in a world of platforms today. They're pervasive in industry and our personal lives. Whether they're from integrated factories leveraging a single platform for visibility into operations to, quite frankly, our own personal use, which is certainly down these days of COVID, but nonetheless will resume, of on-demand personal transportation platforms. And as a result of that platform economy, we really need to change our lens and focus onto operational resilience, because today we operate in a world of we. There's no longer a world of us and them. And so as we look at our cloud platform, it's really being woven into the very fabric of our customers' businesses. We're committed to delivering that operational resilience to support their mission and their regulatory compliance. So given that background, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm focusing on. So looking at things like homomorphic encryption, which is alive and well, and by allowing that computational capability directly on encrypted data, what it does is it allows the cloud to really be leveraged for privacy critical data. But keeping operational resilience in mind, we have to also think about and acknowledge that it's not universally applicable. So recognizing it's a tool in the toolkit, it's one focus area. I think another area that I'm looking at is federated learning. It's particularly important in cloud environments because it allows the benefits of ML productivity to move across that segmented and independent cloud instance environment while preserving security and also addressing privacy. But we're looking at it from the perspective of security. The other thing I think it's important to note is we really need to focus on silicon. So we're looking at security embedded at the silicon level. I think the next wave of security demands are moving to silicon, and we're already seeing beginnings of that in an effort to develop a security standard for semiconductors from the design to packaging stage, underway in the US in the Rapid Assured Microelectronics prototype project, where they're really thinking about how we do that, but using advanced commercial capabilities, apropos to your comment about why we need to have public-private partnership, John. And then when you look at silicon, I think research into new binary, ternary, and quaternary semiconductor alloy compounds is absolutely essential, given where we find ourselves in terms of compound and material availability across the planet. So the last two areas that I want to highlight include some broader perspectives rather than a singular focus. And one of those last two is operational anomaly detection, right? How do we meet newer standards, things like the 2019 MUD IETF standard, particularly when you have an IoT device that doesn't have security built into the chips. I mean, we have some capability that we're deploying with chip manufacturers to help that, but we need to be thinking about operational anomaly detection across the board so that we can determine, and facilitate what end device to signal and network access and network functionality are needed to properly function. And that lies at the foundation of the cloud. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't think about quantum technology, but thinking about it with that special lens of operational resilience. How do those two really fit? I think we should focus on the fact that if we do quantum right, it unlocks the potential of platforms like the cloud. And so I'm going to make an argument for the topological qubit. I think the topological qubit can unleash the logical power to bring the promise of quantum to fruition, not only more swiftly, but more operationally efficiently. I mean, look, there's a debate out there, right? The physical qubit versus the topological qubit. But if you think about operational resilience, my money's on the topological qubit because one logical qubit requires about 10 to 100 physicals. And that compares to something like 1,000 to 20,000 physical qubits for other approaches that are being taken. So those are the kinds of things that I think we need to focus on. And in fact, we are focusing on in answer to the call, how are we focusing on security across the resilience spectrum as we deploy our solutions, whether hardware, software, or services?
Thanks, Edna. Certainly a lot, threw a lot on the table there. Do want to see if anyone had a snap reaction to any of that before moving on to our next panelist, if anyone wanted to chime in. I heard a laugh from Catherine. I'm going to move on to you then, Catherine. As our lone communication sector representative, I know you're viewing the panel, certainly through the lens of a service provider. How does your company address integrity and security in the delivery of services? And do you have a perspective on this topic with respect to your customers?
Thanks, John, and thanks for putting me immediately behind the PhD panelists on this for this event. My name is Catherine Condello. And we'll put it, I have the privilege of being the Senior Director for National Security and Emergency Preparedness with Lumen Technologies, which is one of your global backbone providers, among other things. I also have the good fortune of, like John, I am the Vice Chair of the Communications Sector Coordinating Council, and I too have been dealing extensively and hanging out with Edna through this whole workforce, and Edna and I in particular, are both in a leadership role in this space, but also have been taking a role in sort of unpacking the information sharing aspects of sharing suspect supply chain information. So one, thank you again for inviting a service provider to this panel. And before I begin, I think the important thing is that when I'm talking about products, in my case in particular, I'm really talking about services. And I might use the words interchangeably, but I am going to be predominantly talking about services. So services to a customer have a slightly different customer feel and they tend to be sort of more of an ongoing relationship rather than a one and done purchase. And as such, there's sort of a few variations to the traditional product security relationships that my other panelists will address. So within Lumen, and I'm going to be very simplistic about it, unlike Edna, who just took us to school, in that we sort of view it as having sort of three layers that we need to secure. We certainly need to secure our own internal networks. We also need to secure our transport networks and our infrastructure. And then finally, we need to secure the services or products in this case or managed services that that our customers use. One of the key elements that I think has gone, a huge way in terms of Lumen Technologies is that sort of the governance and oversight of all these three clusters, whether it's our internal infrastructure, our transport infrastructure, or the services that we did develop, not only the development and the implementation, but the security of all of those aspects, both today and strategically in our planning going forward, are under the governance of my boss. And so that makes it very convenient because I at least have some insights into the kind of activities that we're doing. Security of our internal networks is done by a peer of mine, Lena Taylor. And to Edna's point, and you'll hear this as a refrain through each of the three layers, Edna is absolutely correct. It's the operational anomalies that we are now really starting to focus on. When we look at our transport networks or our infrastructure, that's sort of a mashup between both physical and cybersecurity, and that too are two of my peers, Frank and Mike. And again, in both, whether it's physical security or alternatively cyber activity, we are looking for the anomalies. We think we've got things kind of locked down and we kind of have an understanding, but you're always looking for the anomalies. And then finally, in terms of the services that you, the customer, buy, again, security protocols built in, but based on your activity is what we're looking for in terms of anomalies. So I'm not going to talk a lot about our internal thing, although that's keenly important because that's where your customer name sits. I'm also not going to spend a lot of time on sort of the big, millions of miles of transport miles and data centers and stuff like that are sitting across the globe, because I think you really, as members of this, attending this panel, are really interested in the services that we get to. I will say, though, that particularly with respect to the transport network and the various physical infrastructure that we use to deliver our services, our edge, our cloud kind of capabilities, again, the ability to sort of see to some extent is to some level decreasing. And once again, the homomorphic conversation that Edna got into is increasingly coming into play. We have to sort of monitor the performance of our network based on sort of our own baseline globally, plus knowing the aspects of our customer behavior. And those together sort of read green or good traffic behavior. And so once again, we're sort of looking for anomalies. So let's focus on the services very quickly. So the kind of services that we provide, and you're going to laugh at this, right? We deliver voice as a service. We deliver the internet as a service. We have content delivery networks. We have specialized transport, which you consider to be a content delivery network, for instance. We provide edge kind of computing, and we also have our own cloud that can either be private or public or hybrid with you guys. So each of these are sort of a product service that we offer. And for each of these product services, they definitely have security built in, but they are different given the nature of the service. So for instance, an easy one is transport. Transport is somewhat easy because if you want a circuit from point A to point B, and this is about as bottom line as you can get in terms of simplicity, well, transport is inherently kind of secure. If it's point to point, there's very little that can happen to you, the customer, to have your data stolen or steal the service. However, most people don't buy just a point-to-point. Instead, they're buying, if you will, a transport capability. And in that kind of case, they kind of give either us the option to sort of manage that service for insert name of enterprise there, or alternatively, they manage the service, where here are my 5,000 point-to-point circuits that I have used to build a platform for my operation. So we can either manage that customer platform for them, or they can do it themselves. So the point is that once you now start talking about managing the transport, there is indeed a second layer or additional layers associated with the management, or sometimes people use the phrase orchestration of that traffic. In this area in particular, the security protocols that are put in to be able to assure not only ourselves, but you, the customer, that you and only you, or we on your behalf, are managing that traffic, and we're the only ones who can manage that traffic for your enterprise, obviously takes us to a degree of scale of security that is not found on a single circuit from point A to point B. More broadly, where it's not quite so specialized, the internet. Let's say you're a consumer of just, Lumen internet services. Well, certainly, there's a lot of concerns about the internet, and Lumen has, available to the enterprise certainly, and even to our, consumer customers, a whole broad range of security services so that you can experience the internet in whichever form or fashion that you want with less concern, whether it's offering DDoS services, firewalls, and our Black Lotus labs, where we were actually monitoring activity of malicious activity in the internet so that we can keep it at least as clean as possible within our own space, and to protect our customers. Our top-notch sort of built-in security aspects to that particular platform. Finally, that doesn't prevent anything bad from happening. So, one of my other peers is like the best fraud team I'd put up against anybody in the industry. So last but not least, because this is a service and not a one and done, I think what is really interesting about it is that if you are indeed someone who's going to buy these services from a Lumen or something like that, you have within you the power of what I always joke about as being the service level agreement. If for some reason, your service goes down because we didn't do what we were supposed to do, whatever, you have a service level agreement, which in essence keeps us highly motivated on an ongoing basis to make sure that, yes, your confidentiality, your integrity, and overly your availability of your services are built in, and they can't be accomplished unless we've done our security work up front. John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Certainly, if anyone wants to have a quick word, Edna, make sure Catherine was correct in all of that. We want to just check that. But okay, let's move on to Matt. Thanks, Catherine. Matt, you bring a technical security perspective to these issues. Former CTO, and now you've got the perspective of someone who has founded a company that's focused on protecting devices by illuminating supply chain vulnerabilities, both from a kind of a vendor assessment and a product assessment perspective. How do you view the different dimensions of the issue from where you sit, both from a kind of a problem set and solution set perspective?
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. Just as a quick introduction, I'm Matt Wickhouse. I'm the founder and CEO of Finite State. Prior to Finite State, I was the founder and CTO of the cybersecurity division of Battelle, large nonprofit government contractor. And so I have two kind of interesting perspectives on this. One from working with national security and intelligence for a long time, and now working very closely with device manufacturers. So I'm going to kind of dive into one specific area, which is really more of the connected devices or on-premise software, and how that's it's becoming a little bit different than traditional security that you would have for more of the service-oriented products that Edna and Catherine just talked about. So what we're seeing really, at Finite State, where we are focused on automating the risk assessment process for those devices, both for the manufacturers and end users of devices, we're seeing a pretty significant transformation in product security organizations right now within device manufacturers, and it's we're seeing a clear definition of that chief product security officer role, who's really responsible for the security of the products that company is delivering, and can sometimes be a peer of the CISO, who's responsible for the integrity of the data and networks that company operates. But we're also seeing a shift in the market where consumers, enterprises, and governments are caring a lot more about the security of devices and software that are being shipped to them and landing on their networks. And this is pretty expected with the rapid growth of digitalization, the growth of IoT, and especially in industrial and critical infrastructure networks. And so now we care not just about data security, but we also care about the function of all of these devices that are powering our infrastructure or enterprises. And so we see kind of three different areas that are impacting product security teams right now. One is that there have just been a lot more vulnerabilities disclosed in connected devices and supply chain issues, whether that's major CVEs that have come out like Ripple 20 or Urgent 11 that affect tens of millions of devices and have a major impact, or other supply chain issues that are coming to attention. And that's raising consumer awareness of security in all of these products. We're also seeing, and that's driving what we're seeing as an increasing demand for transparency at the time of purchase. So now, if you are building a connected product, the sales process is not quite as simple as it used to be. You're now being asked to document all of your security processes in your product development security lifecycle. And what tools are you using for checking for vulnerabilities, and how are you responding for vulnerabilities? And your customers are asking to see proof of that. They're also starting to ask for more and more details at a product level. So they want to understand the software bill of materials for a device, for example. What's that device made of? What's inside of it? I want to know that so I can manage vulnerabilities myself, or even a hardware bill of materials so they can understand the regulatory landscape. We're seeing increasing requests for information about the provenance of components. So, do you have components from China or other countries that the US considers a potential national security issue? And even we're seeing requests for full penetration test results or vulnerability testing on a device before an organization will use that. And so now, if you put yourself back in that product security team's role, there's a lot to do there. You have to secure your products, but you also have to prove to your customers that you've done it well, and that burden of proof is increasing, just day after day as we see that. Not to mention there's an increasing slate of regulations. So depending on where you're selling something, if that's the UK, they have laws now around IoT devices. California has laws. The US federal government is specifying different requirements for connected devices. So the short version is it's becoming really complicated to manage device security, not just because security is hard, but now there's also all of these other demands from a regulatory and customer standpoint that these teams need to be responsible for. So what we are seeing, the good news is that we're seeing companies who are doing it well, and in short, it boils down to having a really good kind of security development lifecycle that you implement, the DevSecOps kind of processes that we hear about, but really embracing transparency is where we see the leading edge companies who are doing really well. So, having robust testing in place for all of the devices that they're building, but also being willing to kind of share those results and partner with their customers. The more companies are partnering with their customers and opening up, the more they're finding that their customers and their product security teams can actually work together to create secure products. And when issues come up, those get reported back to the vendor and they can work together to fix it, rather than those issues being maybe publicly reported very quickly without time to respond to things. So that relationship between the device manufacturer and the customer is really important right now. And we're seeing that, just in general, the amount of security testing that's happening is really ramping up, both on the device manufacturing side and on the asset owner or buyer side, which I think is really kind of raising the bar for everyone, which is a good thing. The more we test products, the better our security is going to be overall.
So John, I would be remiss if I didn't jump in on this one, because you knew I was going to, Andras. You heard something that was intriguing about what these two just did, right? So what I think Catherine said is we're actually all approaching security in a holistic way. So we've blended it. You no longer sit in isolation. You're looking at physical security, logical, operational security, behavioral security, information security, and privacy. But you're also looking at IP protection. So think about that now in the context of what Matt just said, and the challenge, I think, and an opportunity is how to be transparent with trusted customers in a trusted fashion while still preserving your own intellectual property and differentiation. So that's an intriguing challenge for all of us, and leads to something that is near and dear to Catherine and my hearts, which is information sharing and how to do it in an appropriate fashion across the nation as we look at our connected environments overall.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I completely agree, and that tends to be one of the biggest challenges, especially as you have more and more connected devices, where there are a lot of investments in the intellectual property in those devices, but there's these demands for transparency. I think there are some good examples out there. I think the SBOM initiatives probably strike the right balance, where saying what third-party components you're using likely isn't going to divulge your IP, but it does help the vulnerability management teams at your customers. But there's a lot more work to do here, and it's a very hard problem to solve in aggregate.
Thanks to you both. I do want to come back to the certification. There's a lot to chew on in the context of certification and testing for sure. But we want to get to, and Andras might want to even raise some of that now, but I do want to make sure we get to you, Andras. You also wear a CTO's hat. You've also got a unique perspective wearing that hat for a very large technology company, and now for a much smaller company. So there are some differences in how larger and smaller companies deal with these issues of product integrity and security. And I know you also in our prep session wanted to kind of draw a distinction between cyber supply chain and supply chain as well, because a lot of times there's a lack of definitional clarity in what people are really talking about in some of these conversations. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. I'm not going to get into my resume, but been working with all of you on public-private partnerships for the better part of the last 20 some odd years. And I went from a large company that was trying to get trusted, technology products into other people's hands, i.e. selling, and to a company who's, trying to help the industry in general, in the open group to kind of raise the bar overall on what it means to be to produce a product in a trustworthy approach. So I stepped out of a large innovative company into a much smaller organization with demanding large companies as customers. And I was a little worried about, how far back into the past am I going to go? Having been really comfortable with the change in pace of technology and using all sorts of new things. But to my surprise, really, we're as equally as innovative as a smaller organization, literally using the same tools and infrastructure as larger companies would use. Why? Well, because the journey to the cloud has really leveled the playing field, and all the companies are being able to take advantage, and governments, of the same technologies at affordable price points. So really, it's not about the capability or the product so much anymore, and your ability to afford it. It's how far up you can scale, right? So the difference is not going to be in companies' access to innovation anymore. It's going to be in the application of that technology on their journey through digital transformation. And the winners or the survivors are going to be those organizations that are, best able to adapt and automate their processes using these new capabilities provided as cloud services, as the team has already pointed out. So there is a difference in how much monitoring and testing a smaller organization can sustain from a cyber, supply chain and security perspective. I mean, that's really the difference in a mid-sized company versus a large company. You usually have a much larger cybersecurity, division in a larger company that's doing all sorts of things like sandbox testing and so on and so forth. But you're not going to actually get that with, the next tier down. And so this is where we're going to rely as a smaller organization or at that next tier down, more and more on the cloud provider to bear the responsibility for ensuring that they're protecting us as a customer and the end users, right? And that the visibility into their practices is really important to us. So cloud services are not products. They're really, a mix of technology, DevOps practices. All these services are continuous roll forward services. What do I mean by that? Well, they're not the same product or service today as they will be tomorrow, because they're constantly being updated and changed. So this really involves and is inclusive of well-protected supply chain, and not just the security services that are offered by, the cloud provider. So, yeah, I have a few thoughts on certification, having been involved in, the evolution of the NVLAP programs, having managed that within my own company. So if we think about this, let's talk a little bit about what certifications are and what categories there are. First, there's people certification that comes in the form of knowledge and experiential. So a doctor, takes their exams and then also does a practicum, as an example. That's very important to understand whether folks have the actual ability to apply those written exams. There's product level certifications, which are more focused on feature function. There's certainly security evaluations, but we've learned over the years that not all things are equal when it comes to, trying to evaluate assurance. And that's really why common criteria evolved from an assurance regime to applying functional security controls and capability to evaluation. And then there's organizational assessments that come in two different forms as well. Process certifications, which, can you follow these processes to the letter at a certain maturity? And then practice-based certifications, which are more about your ability to apply practices in the context of risk management moving forward, and can you externalize those practices in a way that are meaningful to me? Well, it's probably not any surprise to Aetna or any of the rest of the team that it's in that category, which I believe that, the most value arises, and the work that, we have done together on ISO 20243. I do think Matt has a very proper approach to IoT devices, because that is an area of particular concern for everybody. And that may well, scale in the long term, but product level certifications just generally, in my mind, don't quite scale. And supply chain is more about your ability to apply practical approaches to protecting the constantly changing landscape against risk, and your ability to actually kind of prove that you're able to do that. What form that comes in might be an organizational assessment like against ISO 20243 or something else. But what I think we're all worried about is that the last 5 or 6 months are going to, suggest to the current administration that we should all have these heavy burden, heavy duty product level certifications. And I can't say just how much I would be against that, because those are snapshots, points in time, and would definitely make you feel good. It's always makes you feel good to buy a certified product, right? But ultimately isn't going to, provide the level of protection that I think we all need. So, there you go, John. I actually kind of kicked that discussion around certification off, and I'm sure that we can kick that ball around for a few minutes now.
Yeah, I really appreciate you doing that. Thank you very much, Andras. Yeah, I mean, again, this 40 minutes has flown by. I mean, if we can get a couple of more perspectives maybe on certification, and just to, I think Matt pointed out it's clearly a growing trend, from the customer standpoint, for sure. I mean, it is also very much, it is the #1 trend that we at ITI kind of saw when we surveyed the global policy landscape. The policymakers really being interested in certification, testing, labeling, other ways of bringing visibility and transparency, and figuring out how to communicate trustworthiness. As Edna mentioned earlier, though, there are key questions, and in particular, it gets even more complicated when in some of these proposals you have governments who are going to be the ones who do the testing or do the certifying. You kind of need access to source code to test most things, right? And I think that's where Edna was going, it's certainly in some cases. So I just wonder, does anyone have thoughts in a minute or less on the validity of certification, particularly in the context of potentially mandatory certifications being imposed via regulations?
So I do, but I'll let Matt go first.
Right.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll do my best here. So one thing is I'd like to very much draw a distinct line between certifications and labeling versus having a risk management approach in place. I think risk management, both on the device manufacturer side and on the buyer side, especially when you're considering devices that are going into critical infrastructure networks, is very important. You need to have good security practices in place. You need to have the appropriate amount of testing in place. I also think that standards can be helpful so that device manufacturers have a target to shoot for. Certification and labeling can be very difficult, in particular because of what Andras said, which is software changes constantly. So, the idea of labeling a product at some point in time as being secure is going to expire very quickly, because firmware updates and software updates happen all the time, and that can completely change the behavior of those devices. So I've yet to see a certification or labeling process that would really keep up with the speed of change.
I think the other thing that Edna and Catherine will also attest to is that one of the things that we wrestled with in the evolution of common criteria was the program itself becoming, a threat vector, and externalizing, all of the code and everything to third parties globally is just too much of it's like the hands in the cookie jar. You just can't resist.
So I think what you just heard is certifications may play a role, but they're not a panacea. And I'm going to bring us back to get to operational resilience. We need to take on the challenge of deploying rigorously across our organizations an approach to comprehensive security and resilience that's informed by standards, but not relying on them exclusively. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, for the record, that as for mandating them regulatorily, I'm not sure that moves the needle at all.
Appreciate that. We are, Catherine, did you have anything you wanted to add on certification? Okay.
No, they're covered.
Perfect, because we've only got a minute or two left here. So this has been a great but too short discussion. We've tried to cover a lot of ground here. In less than 30 seconds each, what is the one key takeaway you most want to leave the audience with here today? And I guess whoever uses the least words gets a prize pursuant to Edna's recommendation in the prep session. Thank you. Let's start with Edna.
Know who you're working with and monitor them regularly.
Okay. Catherine.
On an extension of Edna's platform economy, my platform as Lumen is a combination of what I've bought, what I've built, who I partner with. And so too, as a customer, you are building your own platform economy within your enterprise. So choose the platforms that best sort of align with your own business needs, and feel free to unpack all those choices as so that you can feel assured that by doing business with Microsoft or Lumen or whoever that you feel like they've done their due diligence.
Thanks, Catherine. Let's go to Matt.
I'll do my take on what Edna just said, which is if you're operating an OT, IoT, or IIoT network, know what devices you have, know who they're made by, and know as that software is changing, understand that and work collaboratively with your vendors to make sure that you can secure them properly.
Thanks, and we will give Andras the cleanup duties here.
So I think everybody mentioned the fact that standards and practical approaches and best practices are really important. So a risk-based approach using something like OpenFair, which is heavily adopted across the government space, and the practices that have helped companies like Seagate and Microsoft, as well as others, IBM, evolve their programs internally, practicably, practicably. I guess, is that a word? It might be your word, I guess. But using something like ISO 20243 to guide your way forward, and if it makes sense for your organization to get certified, then we have a growing number of folks that are interested in that, and a program over at NASA that is being based on it. So we'll watch that carefully and help them evolve as they go forward.
Thanks for that. If I can also, I think all of you mentioned standards recently. If I could also answer this, my own question, I do want to also underscore the importance of not only standards, but preferably, international consensus, industry-led standards in all of these areas. I mean, it is a key point of the certification discussion that is sometimes lost on some policymakers. And I also want to just give another shout out to the importance of government and industry working on these issues together, which I know we will hear about in the next session. So thanks very much, everyone, to all of you. I think it was close between Edna and Matt for least words on the wrap up. So I'll keep it as a tie, and I guess we'll sign off. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.